Time for our world politics and world news show, and I've got a special guest coming in from Great Britain. We may have other panelists joining us as well, but I'm going to bring in Yang Takan and see what they've got going on, because I know a lot of people have been very much interested in the conversation around neurodiversity and education and all along those lines. I'm hoping Kelly will join us because she's been on this show before, and she's definitely had some interesting thoughts around that, having dealt with that herself with her own son and all along those lines. And of course, I think Jacoby has had to deal with that also. But I know here in the States, in the United States, a lot of people talk about the over medication of our kids and all along those lines. But I know you've done some research about what's going on in our neurodiversity communities, whether it's here in the United States or around the world. So share a little bit about what you've got going on and your own background and all along those lines, because I know a lot of our folks will be very much interested in your thoughts around neurodiversity and education and all along those lines. So if you'll share a little bit about that, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for having me on the show. And hello to everyone. Lovely to be on the show and share the platform with you all. Just a brief thing about myself. I'm Dr. Takon. I'm a consultant neurodevelopmental pediatrician. I'm based in the UK, and I've been practicing pediatrics for over 30 years and my specialty for over 20 years. So I work in the health service here, and I work privately and for the National Health Service as well. So I see lots of children with neurodiversity. So I'm involved in assessments and management, diagnosis, treatment of some of the conditions as well. Yeah, and it's I don't know where you want me to start, Mark. So tell me where you want me to start.
No, you just talking a little bit about your own research and everything, because I know you've done some research on this field. I know a lot of people, and I do have Rick with me, and he's done some research and has been put in that same kind of field himself, even though he's considered a genius. But some people have said that if he was in a different time, like this modern time, he might have been on the spectrum as well. And he can tell you that and explain it himself. But definitely just wanted to hear some of your research that you've done in this field and your thoughts around how we're doing it. Because like I said, I know here a lot of times people are put on Ritalin. They're considered hyper, and sometimes it might be that they're on the spectrum, or it might just be that they're like many kids. They're just hyper in general and everything. So I just wanted your thoughts around the whole research and how you got interested in this field.
Okay, yes, like I said, I've always been interested in children's behavior and neurodevelopment. So one of the things that drew me to this field was understanding the science behind it, the neuroscience behind when you say somebody's neurodiverse. And I know that over the last couple of years, there's been an increase in diagnosis and treatment. And I think since the pandemic, actually, there's been an increase in the number of children being um, diagnosed with a condition, which there is somehow some explanation for that, because I think for the first time, a lot of families were having to be with their children 24/7, as opposed to children being at school and coming back home, and most of it being there. So, neurodiversity, just to go back, is the terminology has changed over the years, and recently we've been using the terminology neurodiversity to encompass a wide spectrum of conditions. But basically, what it means is if we go back to the neuroscience of it, the brain drives behavior. So there are areas of the brain that controls how we behave. In in our everyday world, it controls how we think, how we process information, and we're most times able to regulate it. So we're different. We've got the bits about personality, but we also have the bits where no matter what our personality is, what if our brains are, the transmission of neurons in the brain is going well, then we would be able to, that those parts of the brain are working well. So I'll take one of the conditions, for example, attention deficit disorder, which is the commonest one that has treatment, where people get medication. So with ADHD, the parts of the brain that control how we think, plan, organize, and behave is what we call largely the frontal lobe. And there are times when you expect to have more of full maturity of that area of the brain, but in younger children, that part of the brain is still maturing. So you would expect behaviors where the child would not be able to behave appropriately up to a certain age. Now, if children growing up begin to exhibit behaviors where at a particular time you would have expected that child to be able to think and process things properly, and their behavior is out of kilter with children of their age, and they cannot put the brakes on, and they're doing things that are completely out of inappropriate for their age, and they can sit still, they block things out, they shout things out, they are impulsive, they're doing things that can put them in harm in many ways. When that condition causes impairment in the child's functioning, and that's the difference I'll come to. So when you talk about a condition causing impairment, it has to be such that that child or that person or that adult is unable to function appropriately, um, because of those symptoms. And so it affects them with their workplaces in adults, with their family lives in adults. It affects them as young people making the wrong choices, and it's detrimental to them. So it impacts on their functioning. So that's what you mean by impairment. So the condition, the traits not only need to be present, it needs to be causing impairment. Now, what you have these days sometimes is a lot of people saying, I think I've got ADHD. Well, a lot of us don't maintain our concentration 100% of the time. So if there are things that we're doing that we enjoy doing, we'll get more engaged with it. But if there are things we don't enjoy, we will drift off. But it depends on how impaired you are. So if there's something serious you're doing, but you can't focus, even things that you should be enjoying, you can't do it because you're drifting off all the time. You can't be productive. And that affects you and affects your work output, affects your capabilities. Then you talk about impairment. If there is a social impairment where you can't relate properly to people, you're always argumentative, or you talk over people, you do not read the other person properly, then there is impairment. But you need to have that impairment at such a level that it affects that person's potential and functioning. That's when the condition is a disorder.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. I know that there have been discussions, and we were actually talking about some gender differences on our morning show, this and everything. But are there more guys that have ADHD than the girls? And can girls have ADHD? I know you talked about that in one of your own podcast episodes. So, what is your thoughts? Are we paying more attention to the boys around society than the girls? And is it something that is a gender differences?
So the boys are common, the prevalence is higher in boys, but that's again because boys present more with what we call the externalizing behaviors. It's the boys that will be running, climbing, jumping, being out there. So they pick up the boys more. What we know is that girls were underdiagnosed because a lot of girls present with, they can be very quiet in the corner, look like they're concentrating and focusing, but things that they're not. And a lot of girls then develop emotional symptoms, so they find it difficult to regulate. And some of those girls, when they're not picked up early, they end up having things like anxiety, depression. And what happens is when they then go to the psychiatrist, they get diagnosed with anxiety and depression without people having to trace back to find out that actually what started this was because they struggled a lot with concentration and focusing. And as a result of them being kind of, frustrated with themselves, they then develop anxiety, they develop the mood changes, and they develop all those problems. So there are girls, the other problem is the diagnostic framework for diagnosing kind of favor the symptoms that you were seeing more in the boys. So when you gave people those questionnaires to rate the girls, people were hardly picking up the girls because the rating forms did not really take into account a lot of the ways in which girls present. But we're understanding more now how girls with ADHD present, and therefore, yes, but they're not readily picked up in the classroom, because they're seen as the quite lovely girl in the corner who doesn't disturb the class.
And I know that one of your other podcasts, you talked about parents being in denial because, like I said earlier, sometimes kids will present activities that just seem like typical hyperactivity kind of activities, and in some cases, it may be that they're in denial, the parents or the caregivers, or things along those lines. But then on the flip side of that, it can sometimes seem as if the medical community is overdiagnosing, because we do know that kids like to be hyperactive in general and everything like that. So I just wondered if you could share a little bit about what that particular podcast was about, because I know that you were asking on that one whether folks were in denial, the meaning the parents and the caregivers.
So yeah, so again, it for a long time the discourse about neurodiversity was a bit negative. So the media wasn't helping. Parents sometimes felt stigmatized because they felt that they were being blamed, and they were readily seeking help for something that was felt to be just behavior. So I don't know about the US, but in the UK, it was not unusual that we would get posts about, things in our regular papers where people will talk about these hyperactive children who are just going to get medication and all that. I'm not saying that there are in situations where children might be overdiagnosed, and that's why I always say for parents to make sure that if they're going to get their child assessed, has to be assessed by a specialist who is properly trained, because we do have people who do not do the assessments properly, and sometimes children can be mislabeled as having neurodiverse conditions. So they're children who've gone through trauma, abuse, and other things, who can present in ways where people can label them as having neurodiversity, whereas this is a child who's gone through trauma. But but sometimes parents do not accept. Two parents in the family might be in disagreement. I've had that commonly, where sometimes the father might say, no, there's nothing wrong with the child, he's just being a boy, just leave him alone. And the mother might be torn between, and sometimes it's the mother might not see what the father is saying. So when you have disagreements between parents, sometimes one parent is in denial. And unfortunately, having been in this field for over 20 years, you sometimes see those children coming back late in the day, years after, when they should have been diagnosed earlier. And it's sometimes quite painful because, the trajectory which some of them have gone through. Because when we talk about the consequences of late diagnosis, we do see it in some of the children.
Yeah,
In
Rick,
general,
Nick had a question for you.
in general, people are more distrustful of institutions, which includes education, than when I was a kid. My wife worked in a couple of high schools. Her best friend is a teacher, and parents can be a problem. Parents are less willing to believe what they're
Yeah,
told by authority figures than they were 50 years ago.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there a differences in the way that it is treated worldwide? Because you mentioned that you're in the UK. I know that Rick's in the West Coast. I'm here in Durham, North Carolina, which is considered the city of medicine, and we've got other folks on this network that are from places like Australia, Bangladesh, and even Africa, and or some of the African nations, as well as some of the Asian nations and Caribbean and Latin nations as well. So just wondering, do you find that there are differences based on cultural differences?
There are definitely cultural differences, and one of the groups that which is one of the things that I cover in my podcast, because I'm trying to reach some communities where they're kind of hell bent. Some of them feel that it's a Western construct, We've had families where they think, oh, they're trying to put a label on my child. So you've had cultures where they feel, no, that's not in my community, that's not in my family. I frequently have had to deal with this. Some of them are faith based and they feel, oh no, that's not that can't happen to me because that might, I believe in God, there's that cannot happen. So you've got all these things that you're having to deal with, and in the meantime there's a child who is really struggling. And I completely agree that parents are quite distraught. They don't trust institutions these days, and sometimes no matter what the school or the teachers are saying, sometimes the parents don't believe it, because they feel people are trying to be negative to their child. So sometimes we've seen that happening. Teachers would point out to the parents that there are things happening, and the parents would deny it and refuse to attend. That happens as well, and I see that a lot here.
And in the US, we have lunatics in charge of autism, of where RFK Jr. wants to solve autism, which is A, ridiculous, B, he's blaming it on food and vaccines, also ridiculous, but a third of American adults buy into that.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Yes, I've heard that, and I think that um, there's been a lot going on autism research over the years, and autism is real. And you can't just solve it by just one or two things. It is a real disability. There are families who have 3, 4 children with disabilities, and I think that when people in authority are talking about these conditions, they need to be sensitive to the families who are living this day by day and not think that it's just something that can just be solved at the tip of your finger. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dr. Takan, what made you get into this field? Did you have family members? I know you're in the UK, but it sounds like from your accent that you might not be originally from the UK and everything like that. But I was wondering what got you into this particular field. Were you always one that was going to go into medicine or something in the medical field? And was this a passion of yours, even as a teenager or as a young child and everything? 'Cause like you said, you've been in this field for about 30 years, but what drew you into the field?
So what drove me into medicine? I initially wanted to be an economist like my father, but then when I, kind of watched his footsteps, I thought this is really boring. I can't just be dealing with numbers. I then got interested in. I was interested in science and all that, and then I had a few family members who were doctors, and I kind of liked what they did. And when I studied medicine and I did pediatrics, I enjoyed working with children. Then I became interested in neurology. I did quite a bit of neurology, but then I was more interested in parts of neurology. When I was training, I was seeing children with behavioral patterns that were present, but I didn't really understand, and we didn't really understand a lot of what we know now. So I do sometimes look back at the children I saw then that I didn't really understand what was going on. And I just feel how I wish I knew as much as I know now because I could have helped them better. So when we look at children, so neurodiversity is something that's been present. So when you look at children who've had birth asphyxia, who've been born through birth trauma, starved of oxygen at birth, had different reasons, really rough time coming into the world, those children are at risk of presenting with neurodiversity. So all those children we used to discharge from the neonatal unit who had been exposed to one form of difficulty, we discharge them home, but we never know what happens to them after until we see them later on. And that's what happens is that now we recognize that neurodiversity has its basis in the brain, the neurons, the formation that could be genetic, and that could also be due to several events that have happened through the child's, birth and all that. So one of the things I do and I'm very involved in is fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. So you see children who've been exposed to maternal substance use during pregnancy. A lot of those children come out with neurodiverse conditions. So neurodiversity on its own is a spectrum that could be caused by so many things. Genetics is just one of it, but we know that the exposures to different things when mother is pregnant, we know infections, birth trauma, several things that happen when the baby's brain is forming. And when that baby is born, you won't pick it up because that baby will look as well as every other baby. But it's during the whole developmental process that the child, you begin to see the true child. And one of the most rewarding things for me in this condition is I've seen children who, when they've come into my clinic, initially the parents are completely despondent. People don't know where this child is going to go. You can see a child who's running, very disruptive, and all that. I've seen those children. The beautiful thing for me is that I follow up my children to the get to the point of going to adulthood. And one of the most touching things for me is when I see that young adult who's done really well. Many of them going to further studies, universities, they've done well, they've gone and had careers. And I see them living to adulthood. And I know that, this is a life that has been changed, that probably would have gone the wrong trajectory, drugs, alcohol, and all that, if they hadn't been picked up early. And that's why I'm very keen on early intervention.
So does technology offer opportunities to have more personalized education and therapy for neurodivergent kids where, like if you've got a classroom of 30 kids and 8 of them are neurodivergent, you only have one teacher. That's tough. But with AI, it seems like maybe kids could get more personalized programs.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with AI now and neurodiversity and all that. So even the VRs and all that, the virtual reality is now being used a lot to help children with autism, and learning, to help them with managing anxiety. There is a lot going on with using AI actually in the processing, in the intervention. So I do feel that there is going to be more, like you say, personalized way of managing them with the use of technology. But definitely there is a lot going on with AI in terms of helping with the assessment, with the diagnosis, and also planning. So lots of children with autism, for example, used to hate coming to the hospital, because of it's such a busy, anxious setting for them and all that. They don't know what's going to go on. But some people have used virtual reality to actually help plan that process for them, to help them to know what they're going to expect when they go to the hospital, to help reduce the anxiety for them. And that's really worked well for them, because them coming into the hospital, you can imagine everything that they hate is happening there. There's noise, there's people, it's just completely anxiety provoking. So there is a lot going on with AI, and I think that the people are doing a lot of research. I've come back from a conference in UAE where there's a lot that was presented on AI in neurodiversity, and it was really good.
So how do you feel about how neurodivergent people are portrayed on TV and movies? Like there's a movie right now, The Accountant, where there's a neurodivergent guy who's a hitman. And there's the show Love on the Spectrum, which shows neurodivergent people dating.
Yeah. Honestly, my honest opinion is that when we single people out into a group and say, oh, this is how they behave, then we are creating that separation even more. And we are sometimes creating stereotypes which doesn't actually fit them. And that's why one of the things I really want is people to normalize the discussion of neurodiversity. It's not supposed to be, oh, you are different, you're so different, and therefore everything around you has to be different. When you normalize the discourse, you're catering for everybody, but you're knowing what triggers the other person and what makes the other person uncomfortable. And I think that the more we do that, I mean, here in the discussion more is about helping their organizations, making sure neurodiverse people are employed, given the same opportunities. I had one of my young people come to me the other day, and this boy was the happiest I've ever seen him since he'd been in school. And I asked why he would, what was different. And he said to me he was working in London. Now, you have to take a train from where he lives to go into London, and taking a train is really busy. And I knew this boy was, he was somebody who was really anxious. And so I was really taken. And I said, well, what are you doing? How you? And he told me he was working in an organization where actually, because he was using a lot of his creative side and all that, it was actually an American company based in the UK. His boss is neurodiverse, and when he came for the interview, because of the way what he brought in, he was thinking outside the box. He had a lot of good things to bring to the company. He was employed, and he's so happy because he's got the opportunity to do working from home, bringing in ideas, going into the office a couple of days a week, and he's working with a whole team of people, neurotypical people, but he's been merged into the company in such a way that he's not being, stereotyped. Yes, they make adaptations for things to make his work better, such as using AI tools to make his work better in terms of his work, his mails and all that, and all the written things he struggles with that he's got to do. But he's working with everybody. He's not being singled out. So, and when I look at some of the films, there are ones on Tourette syndrome, and Tourette's, tics and Tourette's is another thing I do. The way that they're portrayed is it's just not, I don't, I personally feel, it doesn't go well with, and with that community. And they have said it, that community of young people and adults have also felt that they don't like the way that that's being represented.
That makes sense. Do you think that those kind of things, whether it's what we're talking about with autism and the spectrum or Tourette's, because I know a good friend of mine that was on LinkedIn, and he's actually a LinkedIn influencer, was born with Tourette syndrome, and I don't think that you can tell with Brian Shulman now when you watch him that was a part of his trajectory and everything. So I'm just wondering, are these things curable, or are they hard to cure, and you oftentimes are live with those through the duration of your life and everything? So I know that you've done a lot of research around, as you said, tics and the Tourette syndrome.
So you can't. So for example, tics. For example, they start in childhood. They peak in mid childhood, but 2/3 of people with tics will have their tics resolved, and a third will continue to adulthood. Now, it also depends on what you have along with your tics, because with tics you tend to get a lot of other things like ADHD, OCD. So if you've got a lot of comorbidities, you might have it being a little bit more troublesome. But people learn to live with it. And actually, what you find is the person who has the tics is not the person who's worried about the tics. It's usually people around them, the public, the people around, who make that person really feel, oh God, what are you doing? Um, so it's not about curing, even things like ADHD. It's not about curing. It's about knowing your condition, just like anybody with hypertension, with diabetes, and all that would have to know about their condition and what makes it, more prominent, and how to manage it. And I think it's about normalizing that we're not trying to cure people. If you've got a condition, you understand it, you know how it is. You don't. Yes, it can be troublesome sometimes, but you normalize it so that you live with it.
Yeah, that
So
makes a lot
one
of
thing I've noticed is so I'm pretty neurodivergent, but it doesn't mean that I'm a constant pain to deal with.
Yeah.
Like that neurodivergent people have agency, and we can do stuff, and we can learn stuff, and like my wife's neurotypical, and I don't think I'm a pain in her ass any more than a neurotypical person would be. And in a lot of ways, I'm more fun because
Yep. Absolutely, absolutely, and that's what I say, that I find neurodivergent people actually real fun if people take time to actually listen to them. if people take time to actually know them and take away that bias that a lot of people have. I actually enjoy my consultations with my the children and young people I see, because they bring so much, they bring always bring something new, that I engage in that conversation with them. So I just feel that we're not trying to make people normal, and that's why one of the things is, don't we should move away to say we're trying to cure people or we're trying to make them normal. No, we're not trying to make them normal. We want them to be them and comfortable in being them, and that's what we want.
That makes a lot of sense. Everything. Hey, doctor, along those same lines and everything, we've got Jacoby with us, and he's got a child that's got some things in his life as well, and then he's got, I think the kids are of all opposite sides of the spectrum, if I remember correctly. But he can tell you that if he chooses to, and everything. But one thing that I know a lot of people get concerned about is this notion of sleep, and particularly sleep in our
Yeah.
children, but even sleep among adults. We don't always sleep that well either, and everything. So if you could talk a little bit about the sleep problems that you've been finding in children, and is it more prevalent now since they've had to deal with a lot of intakes of stimuli because of the pandemic, and them getting all these different things off of their phone, their video games, and being in the home and everything during the height of the pandemic, even though everybody's pretty much back in school now and everything like that. But I just wonder if you could talk about sleep problems in children.
Yeah, so sleep problems, we see that a lot. And I think what's also happened is that the use of medications for sleep has also increased. I know in the US it's very easy to get things like melatonin. You can get it off the shelves. In the UK, it's not, it's got to be prescribed. But sleep problems can be due to a variety of things. Now, neurodivergent people are um, more at risk of sleep problems for several reasons. One of it is their rhythms, their circadian rhythm. It's also we know melatonin is it's very key in making you fall asleep or begin to wind down to sleep. And we know there's problems with when melatonin peaks in people with neurodiversity, so people with ADHD and autism have particular difficulties with sleep. And then when you've got an ADHD brain, your brain is aroused all the time, doesn't switch off. So you also find it difficult to fall asleep. And some of the medications that are prescribed for ADHD are such that you don't tend to fall asleep on time. It can push your bedtime backwards as well. So we do have all these difficulties with sleep. But one of the things what we always say is try very much to maintain a healthy sleep hygiene. Unfortunately, like you said, during the pandemic, the phones, the use of screens that became unregulated was a problem. And we know that some of the devices we have, if you don't have the right filter, you can get very stimulated and you won't be able to fall asleep at the time you should. So maintaining a very good sleep hygiene is important. Looking at the environment where your child is, making it less stimulatory, less things that, don't put the TV in the room, making look at the lighting, helping your child to have a good routine before they fall to sleep. So what are they doing before then? So consistency in your sleep routine is actually what is really ideal. And then making sure, beverages and things that the child is taking. There's so much drinks now that has caffeine without us knowing it. Children are consuming it, and that also affects their sleep. Um, so we do preach good sleep hygiene and routine first of all. And if that becomes so impairing, then we do recommend to see a specialist. I know people buy things off the counter. It's not really that recommended here. People will consult a doctor to before you go on any of those medications. But I know in places like the States or Canada, I was in the States in February, and my daughter was picking up melatonin from the stores and all that, because it's just readily available. But here in the UK, you have to actually have a consultation people have to look at your sleep pattern, understand why you're having that poor sleep, because it could be for so many reasons, so
Yeah.
many reasons. But what we find is poor sleep hygiene, things that children are on till late. Too many children are watching things. That social media is so rife now. People are on the media till very late, and of course that pushes your bedtime backwards. So just making small changes can actually improve sleep. But definitely, yes, there has been an increase even after the since the pandemic. There's even been more increase since then.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I asked you this earlier, but I don't remember what you said, and you told me see it now as well. Is there an increase in people with neurodiversity? And if there is an increase, why is there an increase?
It's a big question. So we couldn't. So one of the things that happened with the pandemic, there was a lot of anxiety as well during that time. Children were exposed as well to horrible news all the time. The telly was on all the time. We're seeing all the. So we did see a number of children who came out of the pandemic with increasing anxiety. Now a lot of children hadn't been there's a group of children who did not socialize with anybody during that period. So if you look at the babies that were born and the children, the toddlers, they didn't go to nursery, they didn't have their social activities then. We don't know how much of that how much of that played an impact, but we have seen a huge increase in neurodiversity. Now we do really comprehensive and thorough assessments, but there's sometimes it's very difficult to understand why there's been that increase. And it's worldwide. It's here in the States, is everywhere. And people are researching into why do we have this increase in a lot of new, because when you actually assess a lot of the children, they meet the criteria. Why are we saying, is it because there's also improved awareness? So there's been a lot more people being aware of what those behaviors meant. So we've had more increases now. I mean, in our National Health Service, it's increased so much that the waiting list for getting children assessed is extremely long.
Wow. Tell people, both myself as well as Rick and Jacoby, you've got this podcast, and of course we've got a medical podcast here on the network and everything like that that one of our good doctors from Hawaii does, and all along those lines. But tell us about your podcast and what got you into the podcasting field.
So I started a podcast in 2021, and that was because, so apart from my medical degree, I've got a master's in public health. And I've always been interested in public health in the sense that it's not just curing diseases, it's people giving people education. And a lot of the things I was saying was these barriers, people not getting access, people denying, people's thoughts about things. And I thought, okay, I try and educate one person at a time in the clinic. Then I was saying communities that had this notion. So if you had a parent in the clinic, a lot of the influences that they were having was from their community, be it their local community, their faith community. And so I discovered that there were huge number of people, and this included very educated people who had different views about neurodiversity. And I also found that there were lots of families who didn't understand the nature, what caused their child's neurodiversity, and how to support their child and walk that journey. And so I've always been somebody who likes to educate people. Even the clinic, I do talk to children a lot. I like to engage them. And I just felt that there was a way that I needed to get that message out and as a result, I've been able to get people into the podcast who provide things like speech and language therapies, just helping to educate and support these families. I've brought families who've been affected themselves to and to share their stories, just to help to encourage people. And I think that has really helped, to open up that discourse, allowing people to ask questions and helping to improve that journey for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that I was active for a while and not been active recently on Clubhouse, and it looks like you had a Clubhouse series there, and we were talking about doing one, but it'll be around investment, if I remember correctly, with the founder called Ask the Experts. And it looks like you had one called Ask the Experts as well, but it was about childhood disability and all
Yes.
along those lines. So I was just wondering what that show was like, and what were some of the interesting questions that people asked you when Clubhouse was popular. Not that Clubhouse isn't popular, because it might still be popular, but I haven't been on it in a while, so I don't know how popular it is at this particular moment. But I do know it was quite popular, say a year or two ago, and everything like that.
Yes. Yeah, Clubhouse came during the pandemic. It was, yeah, because we were all stuck at home, and and I've myself, so I have myself and two of my colleagues have a platform called School Doctor, and it's a social enterprise. And two of my colleagues who are pediatricians as well. It's a bridge between the schools and clinicians. It helps educators to actually contact clinicians. So it's www.school-doctor.com. And so, when during the pandemic, we felt that it would be a good thing to actually move that, get that platform, have a series on Clubhouse. And so I was the host of that series. And so we had different discussions on different days on Clubhouse. And so it was quite interesting. And I think it was one of the things that also encouraged me to start a podcast as well, because I felt that the questions, it was the same thing. The barriers, the stigma, it was the same kind of thing that was happening. And it just opened my eyes to the fact that a lot of people needed that information and needed that education.
Hey, just really quickly, because in doing some of the research on you, I saw that you had also, in one of your shows, I'm not sure where it was, but you were talking about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and you kind of referred to that earlier and everything, but you got the chance to interview a reality star and some fitness entrepreneur. So what was that like? Because Rick is our version of a star, and all along those lines, to see you Kimball.
Yeah, so yes, that was good. So I'm very involved with the fetal alcohol community, and that was one of the awarenesses. But it was really good because I was able to hear firsthand from somebody who had gone through difficulties with alcohol and the use of alcohol at university, and it was, and she was very honest. She shared that very clearly and honestly, and it was actually it. I think it felt really real about how much these struggles were, and she was a big advocate for trying to help disseminate that message. So it was a very good experience for me doing that. Yeah.
It sounds like it and everything. Just really quickly, did you tell me any questions? I know that you're part of the network, and you've got folks and some experience in this field as well with your own family. So, any thoughts about what Dr. Takan is doing and her work in this field?
I mean, I'm just enjoying the conversation right now, so I'm just sitting back and listening.
Okay, fair enough and everything. So, like I said,
Thank you.
what are some of the you never got to it. What are some of the unusual questions that you have gotten from people, whether it's in Clubhouse or in other places, that were you were not expecting when you have been in those platforms? Because I'm sure people have asked you some questions that have thrown you for a curve.
Um, I can't really think of any huge one now, actually. Yeah. I think maybe because I'm used to being asked all kinds of questions in the clinic room. so so it's almost like I get asked all kinds of things in the clinic room, which, I always have to face up on a day to day. So I can't think of any which has been quite
That
alarming.
makes a lot of
Well,
sense.
I have a question. So, what about heritability and neurodivergence? My wife and I were looking through my dad's papers, and he was born in 1931, well before that was a word. But we realized, holy crap, he was neurodivergent, and in addition, he had OCD and it's like all this stuff that wouldn't be a thing until long after it could help him. So is this stuff inheritable?
Yep, it is a high degree of heritability in neurodivergence. I completely, so I look into my own family, and when I look at my father, who is no longer here, I can completely recognize that, oh my God, he was neurodivergent because he was very, he had very restricted interests. He was a banker and an economist. He was very, to the point with what he wants. He didn't have a huge social circle as well. He did the same thing. He liked the same foods. And so when I look at him in hindsight, after knowing all I know now, I can say, oh my God, he actually was neurodivergent, and I can see that in family members as well. So it is highly heritable, and it's very interesting. There are times when I'm doing my assessments on children, and then parents say, "Oh my God, this is me to the T." So I've had lots of parents who've gone and got their assessments done, and after their child has been assessed, because suddenly they're looking at a mirror and thinking, "This is me completely."
Yeah,
Yeah.
when
How
my
easy?
parents got divorced after, if they'd known what my dad's deal was, I think they would have lasted longer than 5 years.
Yeah.
They might have
Yeah.
lasted longer and everything. How easy is it to get in an assessment? Because I've got dysgraphia, which is a form of dyslexia. Don't go anywhere with me. That you got to figure out left and right, because it might take me a little bit longer to get to the left and the right than the average Joe and everything like that. But it was diagnosed when I did some assessment at Goodwill, and Goodwill has been known to do assessments and all along those lines. So I was well into my adult years. I want to say I was in my 30s when it was diagnosed and everything like that. So I was just wondering, how easy is it to get an assessment and in the UK or just around the world? Because like I said,
It's
I've got all the way through my entire school education, and I did graduate from a university and everything like that. So I got all the way through college through college before even being diagnosed.
Yeah, it's not well, the National Health Service, like I said to you, which is our national vet where it's free at the point of delivery, is it's a long waiting list. So you can imagine, because of the huge referrals, we've got a long waiting list. People will get assessed, but they will have to wait years. So a lot of people go privately, and they're private um so I also do independent assessments privately as well, and our platform School Doctor, for example, for the children. So what's happened is, the schools have been supportive for some children, for some families. So some schools have a bit of budget, and they can support some children to go and have those assessments done. But a lot of times we've got insurance companies, paying, or people paying out of pocket, and then people can get the assessment a bit quicker. But the National Health Service waiting list has become very, very long. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Dr. Takana, just really quickly, because there is another part of your research that used to be a conversation that people had regularly, and I do know some people that have had this disorder that I'm going to mention, but I don't hear it as much as I used to. And I'm not saying that there aren't epileptics that are out there and everything, but are we seeing a decline in epilepsy, or
No,
am I
there's
just
no,
not paying it as much attention, or what's going on in that field? Because I do know that you've done some
no,
research
no.
in epilepsy.
It's not a decline. I do epilepsy. I run epilepsy clinics. I ran one yesterday. We still have lots of children, people with epilepsy, still coming in and all that. They're still there. They're still coming in. We still have. Yes, it's not grown exponentially like the other conditions.
Right.
So we don't have as long a waiting list as the other conditions, but we still have people. So I see lots of people referred for epilepsy, and I run regular epilepsy clinics as well.
Why hasn't it grown as proportionally? I guess that's the question I'm asking, because, like you just said, it doesn't seem like it's grown as proportionally, say, the way that ADHD and some of the other ones have. But that's what I was curious about.
Um, so a lot of epilepsy, so so epilepsy can either be caused by something structural, or where people have had problems in the brain, trauma and all that in the brain, or infections, they will get that, or it can happen out of the blues. For some children with genetic disorders, we're beginning to pick up genetic conditions where, because of more sophisticated testing and the type of genetic screens we've got now, which is much better than what we had before, we're now picking up gene conditions which we never picked up before. Some of those conditions are related to epilepsy, but we haven't seen such an exponential increase. We picked up a bit more, but not as much as the exponential growth with neurodiversity. The reason I don't know, and we're still picking up children where people didn't know, especially the non-convulsive episodes where children were having some behaviors where it could have been going on for a while without people actually realizing that they were having fits. So we're still picking up some of that coming in and us investigating and picking up that they've got seizures, but nowhere near what we've got for neurodiversity, and I don't know why.
Yeah, just really quickly, we've only got another 10 minutes to go, and this might actually get to Toby's goat and get him to actually think some questions and everything. But you kind of alluded to it earlier. How much is the gaming community also been playing into the discussion and all along those lines, even in the diagnosis? Because I know that Toby is in the gaming field, and you just kind of alluded to it earlier, Dr. Takan, when you talked about how more people are having their brain stimulated by different things, whether it's games or whether it's the phone or whether it's a number of other things. So how much has that played into the rise in some of these conditions?
I don't have any facts on that, but there's speculations. There have been things going on, people talking about that. But in the same way, there's been the positives that are coming out of the gaming field in terms of therapeutically, because obviously a lot of people with ADHD, love changing things that change a lot. They love stimulation. It helps them with, it's almost like a reward thing. So when you're gaming and you know it's changing, it's the kind of thing that helps them to stay engaged. So there are aspects of that that have been looked at in some of the um, neurofeedback management of this condition. So it's not all negative. It's not, yes, we want people to one of the questions I always get asked by parents is how much time should he spend on the game? Because the parents want me to tell the child in the clinic that you should only be doing your gaming for X number of minutes. Or some parents would say, Dr. Takon will tell you now that gaming is bad. Well, I can't say that because, the parents want me to say that to the child in the clinic so they can then go and back and say, well, I told you gaming is bad. No, for some children, they need that stimulation, but I think it's about regulating it. For everything is about how much of it. But I know that there are people doing lots of research on gaming and neurodiversity. So I'm looking forward to, reading more about that.
That makes a lot of sense. Any thoughts around that, Jacoby? And then I'm going to get us out of here very shortly and all along those lines. And then, of course, I'm going to have Dr. Takan give us her podcast and how she can be reached and everything like that. But any thoughts around the whole conversation? Because like I said, I wasn't speaking out of school because sometimes Benny's on the show and everything. So you do have children of your own that are on both sides of the spectrum in my mind and everything. So any thoughts just around the whole discussion?
No, like I said, I was just here to listen and learn.
Good. That's always a good thing to do and everything like that. Dr. Khan, if you would, and then I've got to get ready to go and do our other show, which is a entertainment show, which is the Coco McMillan show that comes at 6 o'clock and everything. But if you can share with us how you can be gotten in touch with and anything that you want to share, we might end a few minutes earlier and everything along those lines just so I can get to the other show. But if you want to show how you can be gotten in touch with your podcast that you have and when it is, and anything else that you didn't get to that you'd like to share. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and you've definitely brought a lot of enlightenment on a number of things.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Thank you for inviting me. Like I said, my podcast is Early Intervention Matters podcast, and you can get that at www.drtakon.com. And then my other platform is the School Doctor platform, www.school-doctor.com, and there it's a website that's got lots of resources, and you would see three of us, myself and my colleagues, Dr. Oza and Dr. Bajaj, who were three pediatricians who founded School Doctor, and it's also got ways to contact us as well there. So
sounds great, and all along those lines, like I said, Gary, to get on out of here so I can get to the. This has been an amazing show. On some other shows, including our medical, all along those lines. But it's been fun conversation. I was glad that you were able to come on this particular show, and we'll see you in some future shows as well, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for having me, and thank you to you both.
No,
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye. Bye.
and on that note, we can get on out of here and got to get to Coco show. But that was a fun guest, and a guest from coming to us all the way from the UK. So he was actually coming from the UK and showing the differences that go on in those spaces. But right now, let's get on that.